Hello and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining us for this Georgetown Public Dialogue on After Buffalo, After Uvalde, After Tulsa, Broken Hearts, Broken Nation, Faithful Action. I want to thank you all for joining us. You're not alone. I just looked and we have more than 2,500 people registered for this. I think there is a hunger for civil dialogue and principled discussion at this time of such sadness and loss. We have done, I think, 50 of these, 49, I guess, since COVID hit, and we've reached 170,000 people, but there is tremendous interest in the reflections that these leaders are going to provide. If you want to ask the panelists a question, you can do so. Use the email at the bottom of the screen that's going to flash there. And you can join our conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Buffalo Uvalde Tulsa CST and by tagging GUCST Public Life. So that's Buffalo Uvalde Tulsa CST and tagging GUCST Public Life. I want to just take a moment and just think about what we've been through together. The shootings of school children in Uvalde, Texas, Black shoppers in Buffalo, physicians and others at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa have broken our hearts. I think each of us thought about the 9 or 10-year-olds that are in our lives, about shoppers on a Saturday afternoon going to get a birthday cake for a family member, or a physician, a receptionist at St. Francis who are trying to heal people, doing their work. And they're never going to come home from school. They're not going to come back from shopping. They're not going to come back from St. Francis. So they've broken our hearts. They've also, I'm sad to say, I think, broken our nation. In some ways, instead of focusing on the loss and the lives that we've lost and what we need to do together, many, especially, frankly, our political leaders, retreat between political, partisan, ideological walls. And we hear the same stale and deadly talking points. People argue whether we need thoughts and prayers or change in action, whether it's guns or people who kill people, whether it's mental health or young people getting assault weapons, whether it's a culture of violence or policies that don't protect us from gun violence. As if those choices were either or questions. The genius of Catholic social teaching is the word "and" that brings things together. And the sanity caucus in these discussions is way too small. And we have 5 leaders of the sanity caucus with today. And we want to look at this through the eyes of faith, bringing together the pastoral, the spiritual, the human, the community, the policy and the politics together in light of the call in the Bible to choose life. So these 5 remarkable leaders are Sister Judy Byron, an Adrian Dominican, a former teacher, associate director of the Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center in Seattle. She's also, and this is why she's here, is director of the Northwest Coalition for Responsible Investment and a leader in corporate responsibility efforts on gun safety. Archbishop Gustavo Gacera Ciern is the Archbishop of San Francisco, and his archdiocese includes the town of Uvalde. And he has been absolutely at the center of our church's response to the killing of 19 children and 2 teachers. And all that has come with this, the terrible frustration and anger about the response. I said San Francisco. That's not the case. It's San Antonio, Texas. Texas versus California, I would get in a lot of trouble. It's San Antonio, and it includes Uvalde. Reina Guidos is reporter and editor at Catholic News Service, where she has been covering day after day after day the Catholic responses to Buffalo, Uvalde, and Tulsa. She is also the author of Retiro Grande, A Table for All. Sister Mary Haddad is a member of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas and is the president and CEO of Catholic Health Association, the group of Catholic healthcare facilities and systems, and they have long advocated for policies to protect life, including policies regarding gun safety. And Father Brian Massengale is a professor of theological and social ethics at Fordham in New York. He is the author of Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, and he's received lots and lots of awards, but he got the 2022 recipient of the Faith Doing Justice Award from our friends at the Ignatian Solidarity Network. So I thank you for joining us as we put this together quickly. Let me begin with Archbishop. You're the oldest of 15 children, I learned. You were born in Mexico. You became a citizen of our country. You came to this country as a member of the Missionaries of the Holy Spirit, and you came here to work with migrants. You were appointed auxiliary bishop of Chicago, which has its own deep challenges regarding gun violence, and then Archbishop of San Antonio. I read that when you heard about what happened, as we did, you were in a meeting with your priest, and that meeting ended. You went to Uvalde and you went to the hospital, you went to the Civic Center, you said Mass, you tried to be of comfort. You wrote to Pope Francis, and the next day he shared his condolences. I read where an important part of your priesthood and ministry is the quote, belonging all to God and belonging to all people. You have lived that motto every day, but especially over the last several weeks. So we want to thank you for your leadership and your ministry. You've been the gospel in action. You've been the corporal and spiritual works of mercy at a time of great sadness. As you have consoled your families, you have consoled the rest of us and called us to act in solidarity. So please accept our continuing prayers, our condolences, our admiration. Can you, and this is so general, can you describe what you and your people have been through and how all this looks through the eyes of faith? How has our Catholic faith been tested in Uvalde? And how has it helped people deal with unimaginable loss?
Well, the experience was something that you don't expect to see or to live. And particularly not only for me, but for that community, which is a small community of 15,000 people, very united, very peaceful community. So this became like something like, not because we have not heard other situations or even seen or watched on TV or on internet, but it's just that you are never ready for something like that. So something that was very strong in my heart was I need to be there and to connect with the people without knowing how the whole scenario was looking like. The first time I heard, as I was with the priest, was that 2 children were killed in Uvalde. The story changed along the way when I arrived there. But it was to be with the people and to recognize that every life was important. Those who have died, those who survived, and those around them. And so it happened that many of them, they were Catholics, but that was not the issue. We open ourselves to connect with anyone. And because it's a very close-knit community, people, even if they practice different faiths or they live in different areas in the town, they are family. They're family. And so in that sense, was very easy to relate to people and to find the people. It was not complicated at all. But I was able to see suffering, pain, uh, some kind of numbness proper to a shock experience, and a lot of tears, people crying, people confused, the families without knowing either members were affected to a point of death or they were just injured. All that was part of the scenes that I witnessed. And so it was to meet everyone and anywhere. So was in the hospital first, some people outside, some people inside, a person that was told immediately that their child most likely didn't make it, and then to go to the civic center in which families that were gathered without knowing, either they knew that was something wrong with not seeing their children that afternoon, but they didn't know for sure. And so that uncertainty, even they didn't know how to express themselves, and I didn't know how to express except through gestures. Gestures were very important. It's not that I chose that. It comes kind of natural in times like those that we experience, just to be of comfort and consolation. And at one point, when I asked the families, before they were notified and meeting many of brothers and sisters in leadership in different faiths, ready to notify to them, what they were asking was prayers, So the faith component was right there. I mean, it was not like, so other people, even media people, they were asking me, the faith was shaken. At that time, what people was asking for prayers and trying that God, someone beyond what they were able to understand and we were able to understand, was at work and to connect with him. So I think that is important because many times we think that people, they lose faith. At that stage, it was not faith missing. They increased their prayer. We were there just to say, God loves you and we love you through gestures.
Well, thank you for being there, and thank you for sharing that experience. You're a pastor. You're also a leader, a citizen. How can the rest of us stand in solidarity, support the survivors and the families? You have talked about the need for prayers. You've also talked about the need to change policies to prevent this from happening. How can the rest of us stand with the people of Uvalde and the Church of San Antonio?
The best way that I would say is to really be led as people of faith, to led by the Spirit, because the surprises that could happen and the people that will come forward. I mean, it's not that we put a plan together, but people that were coming forward, there were psychologists, teachers, parents, people from the schools. So it's not like you organize a plan. So to be led by the Spirit, otherwise we just use our own talents and gifts. And we need more than that for bringing peace and understanding and eventually dialogue. But I invite people to know the stories that people themselves in the town have expressed. Because otherwise, we have a narrative that we create or what we think. We need to listen to the stories of people, the people who have been there, people who planted, I heard today, people who planted the trees for that school when it was a lot of discrimination, for example. and they live across the street or close by the school, they have a different contribution. And listening to them, we start understanding the situation, because each one of the situations that you have mentioned that have happened lately, they have their different tint. And so we need to know how to be with the people right there. And we have counselors, and we have parents, and we have teachers who can understand better the situation. But also at the level of policy, guns had been idols, and we had them like that, sacred. And with the same sacred arms, we kill people. I mean, and children, innocent people. So that is another side of it. And another piece of it is to think with a vision for the long haul, because otherwise these communities that are impoverished, they can be left abandoned. So
Yes.
the vision, the strength.
You said we ought to listen and learn, pray. You also said we should pray for the conversion of our public officials, that they might have the courage to take on powerful interests and stand up for life and all life. Let me turn to Sister Mary Haddad. Sister Mary, you lead Catholic Health Association, which is the ministry of the church in healthcare. One of your members is St. Francis in Tulsa, and this terrible story where someone came in anger and to kill the physician, another physician, a receptionist, a patient. You've done a lot of things in your life. You've served in Central America and Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, but mostly you've been a leader in Catholic healthcare. I was really struck by the fact that you said in the aftermath of the shootings in Tulsa, called for us to resolve to turn our sorrow into action so that we can prevent similar tragedies from occurring. As a woman religious, as a leader of healthcare, as a leader in the advocacy discussions, what were your reactions when you heard this horrible story of how a place of healing had become a place of killing?
Thank you, John. But before I respond to that, let me first thank you, Kim, in Georgetown for holding this event. I think it's these types of conversations that need to continue if we're really going to come together to address violence in our communities. And I also want to thank you personally for reaching out to me last week after the shooting at St. Francis. I've been in communication with the CEO, Dr. Cliff Robertson, and had the chance to convey the condolences that I've received from so many people over the last few years. Our healthcare workers continue to show great resiliency. Throughout the past 2 years with COVID, COVID tested their resolve, and they've risen to the task of providing compassionate care day in and day out while putting themselves at risk and their loved ones at risk of COVID. So the thought of risking their lives due to gun violence is beyond my comprehension. So to your question, John, like most Americans, I was shocked that another mass shooting was happening again. But this time it felt personal because St. Francis is a member of CHA. And the thought of such violence happening at a medical center really pushed me to the edge. I was already reeling about the shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, the vacillation between feelings of sadness and feelings of anger. And although you didn't mention this, and it's not a secret, that I'm a former teacher and principal. So I really was appalled once more to hear elected officials suggest that teachers should have guns to be trained to use them in the schools. It's ludicrous. We need to arm teachers with educational resources, technology, and more pay, not guns. And the same is true for our medical facilities. As a result of the tragedy in Tulsa, our hospitals and our clinics are now spending more dollars to increase security. Money that should be invested in patient care is being diverted to keep people from being shot in a place of healing. It's absurd. What is most disturbing to me is that we failed to do anything about it. We failed to address gun violence and the destructive impact that it has in our society. Our core institutions, our schools, our hospitals, our places of worship, they've all become victims. They've been weakened and nothing's being done. So we must hold our elected officials accountable and demand action be taken to address gun violence in this country through sensible gun policies.
Sister, you're a teacher, principal, healthcare leader. Why is gun violence a health issue? Some would say, leave that to, criminologists and experts. Why is the healthcare ministry of the church working to change gun policy?
So let me say, John, that our position on gun violence is first informed by our faith, but it's also informed by the experience of our providers who see the devastating impact of gun violence each and every day. So we actually need to address gun violence in two ways. First, we need to make all our institutions safe. And I'm going to speak specifically about the need to make hospitals safe for our workers, our patients, and their families. The shooting in Tulsa was an example of the realities and fears that healthcare workers face every day across the country when they go to work. The fear of violence at work is a reality. Healthcare and social service workers experience the highest rates of injuries because of workplace violence and are 5 times more likely to suffer a workplace violence injury. As I said earlier, this is not only a safety issue for healthcare workers, but it's also a financial issue. Every time a hospital is forced to hire more security, build more security checkpoints, and install more metal detectors, it's money that's being diverted from care and treatment of patients. It's a cost we end up paying, whether it's in higher medical bills, premiums, or reduction in services. We're already facing an extreme workforce shortage due to COVID. We had to close units because of our inability to staff those beds. And there's a great financial challenge that's been exacerbated by this gun violence. I would say the second reason this is an issue for Catholic healthcare is that increasing gun violence is a public health crisis. More than 19,000 related murders took place in 2020, the most since at least 1968. And it represented a 34% increase from the year before, 49% increase over 5 years, and 75% increase over the past 10 years. And to put that in perspective, for children under 19 years of age, firearm-related deaths overtook car accidents as the leading cause of death. So I think we must understand that this is not just a crime issue, it's a public health issue. And the last point I'll make here, John, is that this is also a health equity issue. We know that people of color are disproportionately affected by gun violence. 77% of gun homicides victims are persons of color. So let me end with that.
Those numbers represent human lives, people of color, young people, all of us. Let me turn to Father Brian Massingale. Brian, you're a professor of theological and social ethics at Fordham. You're former president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. You and I got to know each other when we worked together on the Bishop's Criminal Justice Statement, which had a powerful section on the need to address gun violence. Candidly, you've written this tremendous book, Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, but in a lot of ways, you're the conscience of our church when it comes to racial and social justice. One of my favorite titles, you write hundreds of articles. One of my favorite titles is The Church Must Find Its Way Back to Jesus, which is good advice today and every day. Buffalo was different, not just because it was a supermarket. It's because a young man drove a long way and cased out different places because he wanted to kill Black people. He wanted to shoot people who were different than him, people who might replace him and people who look like him. And I wonder what you thought as you learned about this. So the security person was trying to protect others, the Black older gentleman who was helping someone load their groceries, the cashier, the grandfather buying a birthday cake. And they were shot because they were Black and were going to the grocery market. What went through your mind? Well, help us think. What was happening there?
Thank you, John. Thanks for your kind words. And thank you for this opportunity to have this important conversation. I was off the grid on Saturday when this occurred. So I first found out what happened in Buffalo on Sunday morning when I turned on the TV and heard the news and saw the shocking images. And then I realized I had to redo my homily because I preach here in New York at St. Charles Borromeo, which is the mother church for Black Catholics here in the Archdiocese of New York. And I knew I had to address this issue. So I went to church. The mayor of New York City had ordered that there be extra police protection surrounding Black churches that Sunday morning. I entered the sacristy and entered into conversation with the ushers and the ministers beforehand. And we were discussing the fact that maybe we need to start having active shooter trainings here at the church. We talked about the fact that we at St. Charles, we often have white people who visit the church as guests. And we saw that there was a lone white person who was praying by himself in a pew. And 3 men came up to me and said, we can, sit ourselves around him just to make sure that, in case he does anything, we can intervene. During the service, during the consecration, someone's kneeler hit the church floor and it echoed loudly through the church, and everyone immediately jumped. We all thought it was a gunshot. Now, the reason I tell that story is because you're right. What happened in Buffalo was different because it was a hate crime. And hate crimes are intended to send a message. And that message was received not only by myself, but by all of my parishioners that this is a country where our lives are not safe, a country where our lives don't matter. And we live in a country where, sadly, a person, white people, can feel empowered to simply end our lives for no reason than the fact that they believe that we don't belong here. And as I preached in my homily, I said that Martin Luther King Jr., after the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed back in the 1960s, he said that we have to be concerned not only about the murderers, but about the system that produced the murderers. And so we have to understand that what happened in Buffalo is not an accident. It's not an isolated incident. That what we've seen in Buffalo is the end result of years of racial manipulation, the appeal to the racial fears of white people, saying that they're going to be replaced by people of color and that their own privileged status is in danger of being endangered. And so I think what we need to understand is that Buffalo was indeed a hate crime. It was a hate crime.
You write and teach and preach on the principles of Catholic social teaching. How do those principles guide us, call us to action in response to the violence we've witnessed? How does respect for human life and dignity and other requirements of our faith challenge Catholics and others to respond?
That's a great question. And I think there are 3 things that Catholic social teaching calls us to in this moment. The first is it calls us to have a deeper respect for life, even post-birth. And I think of Pope Francis's observation after the murder of George Floyd, when he said that we Catholics cannot tolerate or turn a blind eye to racism in any form, and yet claim to be protecting the sacredness of every human life. And so I think we need a deeper respect for life in general in our country, but especially for Black and brown lives. I often say that the deepest problem we face as Catholics is not whether we believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but do we believe in the real presence of Christ in Black and brown bodies? The second thing I think our Catholic social teaching calls us to, and this I'm reminded of by St. Pope John Paul II. During one of his visits here in the United States, he said that the most important question facing a democracy is how are we living together? And we are not living together very well. We have a great consensus on what responsible gun legislation looks like. The vast majority of the American people support a ban on assault rifles. These are not hunting rifles. These are military weapons. The vast majority of the American people support raising the age of possession. The vast majority of American people support mandatory waiting periods. The vast majority of people support training and responsible gun ownership. It grieves me that we live in a country where we require more training to drive a car than we do to own a gun. And so I think our Catholic social teaching calls us to look at our country and ask, how are we living together? And then, as Bishop Sisto said, to be led by the Spirit and to embrace the Spirit's gift of courage, to demand of our elected officials that they reflect the will of the people and protect the dignity of life both before birth and after birth.
All life, every life. Rena, you're a reporter and editor for Catholic News Service. The first thing I want to say is thank you for your good work and your colleagues at Catholic News Service. We heard the news earlier this month that Catholic News Service and its coverage in this country is going out of business, which is a terrible loss for our church and for our country. And we want you to convey to your colleagues our deep disappointment and our admiration and our condolences, frankly, that your work won't continue. And you're a great example of that work. One of the things I've learned so much from you about the church in El Salvador and Central America. You're reporting from there. You help us know more and understand more. And then a tremendous example is you have covered the response of the Catholic community to what happened in Uvalde, what happened in Tulsa, what happened in Buffalo. I read this morning you had a story about children testifying before Congress on these issues. Can you describe the responses of the Catholic community, both the pastoral responses and the ways in which our church has been a leader in calling for different policies?
John, I think that the response from the Catholic Church is exactly what the Pope intended when he talked about the field hospital. And we have seen the field hospital in the pastoral response in Uvalde with, Archbishop Gustavo. We've seen it in Buffalo when the bishop over there went to put some flowers down, and backtracked a little bit and actually calling out racism when he went to do that and to meet with people, which some people had been, upset by. We've also seen it in the response at St. Francis Hospital with the bishop visiting, some of the employees there, as well as, women religious. And we've also seen it, with the response of Catholic Charities, again, in places, like Texas, in Buffalo, by the laity. I think the bishops, the way that the bishops act is very important. Because that's what most of the people see. But behind them, there's a whole group, there's a whole response, and there is a field hospital that has been put into place, largely because that is what the Pope has asked for. And it's not the first time this has happened. It happened, sadly, when something similar happened to the Diocese of El Paso. when Bishop Mark Seitz in 2019, again, a shooting very much like Buffalo, where it was targeting a certain group of people at the Walmart. It was targeting Latinos, and also for the same reasons as we've seen in Buffalo. And the bishop in that case, Bishop Mark Seitz, and a lot of his priests went over there when people were bleeding and when people were dying, when they were in the hospital, tending to them. So this is, the physical manifestation, I think, the incarnation of the field hospital that the Pope, has very much wanted of the church. Now, there's also another response, which is, the visceral written response by a lot of bishops who immediately went on Twitter to denounce some of this violence. Cardinal Cupich said, the Second Amendment didn't come down from Mount Sinai. Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville was, who's a very, kind and, kind-hearted person. You could tell his indignation in his tweet, when he said, this, don't tell me that, guns are not the problem here. I'm sick of it. To say something like that from somebody so mild-mannered, is really calling, I think in a way, calling out power and saying we have to do something here. And again, this is part of the field hospital. It's, I think, the proximity that the Pope has called for. And I think it's proximity in words, but also in actions.
The Bishops' Conference has written Congress and has made statements. I remember when I was a young staffer at the conference in 1976. I think St. Peter was still Pope at that time. I helped the bishops write a statement on gun violence, advocating for changes in our laws. What is the conference as the national advocacy unit for the bishops calling for in terms of change laws and change policies in terms of gun violence and the related issues of mental health and safety and all the rest? What is the conference advocating?
I think a lot of people would be surprised. And I think, sadly, there's a kind of a visceral response when you say USCCB, the conference, or the bishops, because there's a lot of things, involved in it. And sometimes I think there's a reaction that they don't want to listen to, but they will be surprised to find out that they actually back a lot of gun control. And, some of these titles are very long and complicated, but if you just go and Google, I would tell people to do this, Google U.S. bishops, gun control, 1975. You could also just do bishops and gun control, and you can see that they back a lot of bans on assault weapons. But they've also called, to regulate images of violence. I mean, it's a very comprehensive type of documents that they have, issued over the years. They've changed a little bit, but I was also surprised, and I think it's a document that that you worked on in 1975. But I just wanted to read you a tiny bit of it because it says that the Bishops' Conference argued that handguns should only be accessible to law enforcement and military, and civilians should significantly have restricted access. And again, a lot of people will be very surprised that that's in there. I think because I posted some of it on there and they say, well, the bishops don't care, and it's, in the back, because you don't want to correct someone in public, but I've said to a lot of people, they believe exactly what you believe.
Thank you, Rena, for sharing that history with us. Sister Judy, I am really pleased that you are with us because you represent an area of work that I think most people are unfamiliar of. You're an Adrian Dominican. You've been working for Justice and Peace for decades in Seattle. You're a part of the Justice and Peace Network in Seattle. You're the leader of the Northwest Coalition for Responsible Investment. And you have been in dialogue with and pushing the gun manufacturers to own and be responsible for some of the damage their products do. But I want to go back before. I'm going to ask you about the corporate responsibility efforts. But the first thing I want to ask you, you were a teacher for many years. What ran through your head as a sister, as a Catholic, as an advocate of justice, when you heard about these third and fourth graders mowed down in their classroom?
Well, John, I'll do that. But I want to start by saying that I've been very proud to be Catholic during these very sad times in our country, because the church, from Pope Francis to the Archbishop to each of the panelists here today, I mean, the response has just been what it should be. I've really seen the church at its best. So I thank all the faithful. Well, I'm heartbroken. I mean, I was a teacher for over 25 years. We had fire drills and earthquake drills because I'm in Seattle, but it was a place where the children were happy and they were safe. And in addition to being a teacher, I'm a great aunt of 14 young children. So I remember Sandy Hook, and I remember thinking, if we don't do something now, we never will. And we didn't. And then I remember Parkland, when the young people stood up the very night of the tragedy and said, we will march for our lives. And millions of us marched with them. And again, not much changed. And now Uvalde. And this morning I watched the House hearing where Maya, the young girl who covered herself in her friend's blood so the gunman would think she was dead, testified. And you could tell it was really hard for her, but she did it because she wants to save other children's lives. So what I'm thinking now is we cannot continue to let our children do the heavy lifting. We adults must stand up and demand that gun violence end. And really, our children are our future. So, we have to be the adults.
Well, as an adult, as a religious sister, as a leader in corporate responsibility efforts, you have taken on a remarkable effort to challenge gun manufacturers, first through dialogue and then through shareholder resolutions to examine the consequences of their policies. NBC News called you a leader of Wall Street rebels on this issue. A quiet leader, methodical and persistent, but also restrained and compassionate. You got the Legacy Award from the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, and you have actually made some progress. Some of your shareholder resolutions have passed. Can you tell us why you took this route, what you're doing, and what you hope to accomplish? Many of us are focused on government officials. You're focused on the manufacturers of these weapons.
Sure. I'll tell you this story. A little known fact probably is that women religious have used their investments for shareholder advocacy for almost 50 years. And we do this ministry in collaboration with the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. And we began to notice that whenever there was a mass shooting or all the gun violence in our country, that almost every entity had something to say about it. Even the NRA would put out a statement, but we never hear from the gun manufacturers. And we believe that, they're making these, they have a vital role in the solution to gun violence. So in the summer of 2017, 5 years ago now, we wrote to them, voicing our concern about this issue and asking for a dialogue with them to discuss how they could be part of the solution. And no response. We didn't hear from them. So for the 2018 shareholder season, we filed shareholder resolutions with Sturm Ruger and Smith & Wesson. And they were going to be on the proxies for 2018. And Parkland happened in February. And at the shareholder meetings, a majority of shareholders supported the resolution asking the companies for a report on what they were doing to promote gun safety. Now, majority votes at shareholder meetings are rare, and especially on social issues, and they aren't binding to the company. But if 69% of your shareholders say you should do something, you likely should pay attention. So the companies did the gun safety reports, which were very disappointing. They there was no evidence that they would take any responsibility to look at this gun violence in our country. So every shareholder season since 2019, we're kind of like the woman in the gospel that keeps begging for a crumb. You said when they've dialogued with us, that's a very generous word for what they've done in email communications, et cetera. But anyway, the story continues. So every shareholder season since 2019 on the Smith & Wesson and the Sturm Ruger proxies, we have had resolutions asking them first to adopt a human rights policy that says they'll respect human rights. And then after they do that, to do a human rights impact assessment to see where, they might be harming human rights. And, some of the things we're asking them to do is to, look at the guns that they're manufacturing. How could they make them safer? Today, everything we own is smarter than we are, at least than I am. And here we've had no new technology in guns that would make them less accessible. Also to monitor how they're marketing their firearms. So a week after the tragedy in Uvalde, our proposal was presented at the Sturm Ruger annual meeting of shareholders. And once again, a majority of shareholders, 69%, stood up and asked the company to do a human rights impact assessment, to look at their business. I'm sure it's concerning to the company that its major investors likely supported the proposal, because we had 14 faith-based co-filers that we hold a minuscule amount of shares in the company, and they point this out to us often. So I'll wrap up by saying that I was pleased this morning to watch the House Committee on Reform and Oversight, and also to learn that they've written to Sturm Ruger and Smith & Wesson, asking them some of the very same questions we have to understand what's happening.
Sister, that's unique. That is powerful. And one of the things we've learned is that it's not a wise idea to ignore a sister. So I would warn the gun manufacturers. We have lots of questions. I'm going to combine some of them. First one, what is the most effective thing that local parishes can do to affect some change in the area of gun violence? Do you do a dialogue? Do you do advocacy? Do you do education? Who would like to take that one on? Maybe Archbishop, you were a pastor. What advice would you have to a parish that wants to support the people of Uvalde?
There are different components. There is not just one way. I think always first, the person or people who are affected by, in the past, on the present, by this gun violence and these shootings. But then is to organize the community to see how the common good leads the expertise or the talents of the people in the community to be in advocacy, to be directly relating with the political leaders. The one big problem that I see that has been happening in these last couple of weeks, the situation in Uvalde, is that still everything is looked by politics. And when it's just that lens, people they don't matter. Structures in place, they don't matter. Corrections or improvements in procedures, in safety, and as Sister was saying about these companies in what they produce, that will not be heard because is the political and basically is the party lines, those are what leads everything. So yes, in a parish is the faith, what we have learned from Jesus himself. In our case, in Uvalde, as you asked it directly, is children, which adds to the picture of the rest of the panelists, is children 9 and 10 years old. And all the other kids, I met with teachers of grades below the 9 years old. And they were so scared, and it's a trauma for them because they were across the hall, or someone was across the little way that connected the two classrooms. So, I mean, this is the person or the people first. And I think we're going through the funerals, can sensitize the community in ways to understand better the drama, the real situation of what is the consequence of shooting. So we're in a culture of death, how to build a culture of life.
One of the people who submitted a question says in Richmond, 7 Catholic parishes are holding vigils, both for prayer and action. So that's another suggestion. Let me read 2 questions that have a similar theme. Like many Catholic gun owners, I joined the NRA as a life member years ago. A huge number of us disagree with the present policies and tactics. How can the church help people like me band together and express a clear and common voice in favor of common sense legislation? And then there was another one, let me find it here. It said, I've been an educator, Catholic educator, for 35 years. I grew up on a farm hunting. I now am a parent of someone in law enforcement. Why do our elected officials fail to see this gun violence as a pro-life issue? Archbishop Gustavo, you have been eloquent about the fact that we have to protect all lives, but I want to ask others, maybe Sister Mary Haddad and Brian, how is this a pro-life issue? It's obviously not the same as abortion or the death penalty, but it involves the protection of life and dignity. And how can people band together to have their voice heard? Maybe, Rena, if you could take a stab at that. But first, Sister Mary and Father Brian, how is this a life issue? Distinct from, but a part of other life issues?
Well, John, I'll start by saying it's what I said earlier. When we start looking at the statistics and the impact gun violence is having on one's life, to me, that's not even debatable that it's a life issue. Of course it is. And the impact that it's having, really, we always hear the debate. It's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. Well, we forget to recognize the impact that this violence is having on young people. And we're going to see a whole generation of individuals who are impacted by post-traumatic stress. We already have. That's another health issue. So I don't understand the question of even asking, why is this a life issue?
And if I could jump in, I'm glad that the person who was a member of the NRA wrote in, because I think that's one thing we need to understand. There's the NRA as an organization and the NRA as its members. My brother is a gun owner. My brother is a proud NRA member. My brother is ashamed of the NRA because of its consistent obstinacy to common sense gun legislation. And this is where I think, what can the church do? I think the church needs to stop being afraid of controversy. And I think at this point, we need to start naming some names. We need to call out the NRA, and we need to talk about the influence of money in our politics. As I said before, the vast majority of Americans of both political parties and of no political party support very common sense gun legislation. And the reason why it's not being enacted is because of the influence of money. And so I think one of the ways the Catholic Church can help the person who's an NRA member is by putting out our voice, not only in statements, but also in training teachers and educators and priests on how to talk about this as a life issue. Because I think all too often we look upon it as a political issue, we don't frame it as a life issue. And I think that's something we need to do to get to frame this as a life issue, to help public Catholic leaders talk about it as a life issue, and then to support people who are members of the NRA to hold their organization accountable for their public actions.
Another question, Rena and Sister Judy. Someone said, we don't need more words, we need action. And we've been talking in words, but we've been describing action in terms of public policy, in terms of corporate responsibility. Rena, you cover Capitol Hill and you cover how the church advocates. What would your advice be to people who want to make a difference on this? And then Sister Judy, you're not only a corporate responsibility leader, you're a citizen and you have used your voice in your state to make a difference. So how do we turn words into action that will bring about change? First Rena and then Sister Judy.
I think that Archbishop Gustavo hit on something very important, and that is, what role politics plays into, our lives and our lives of faith. Especially, I think in a way, politics has become a religion, and we need to look at that. It has replaced religion. We're more likely to view an issue, again, a life issue, through the lens of politics and not faith. And I think that part of it is also talking to people who may not agree with us, or that we don't agree with, and then trying to find ways to, what can we do about this? How can we be the field hospital, part of the field hospital? Is it through, giving to a certain organization? Is it by going, writing to our members of Congress? I think there's something, first of all, we need to talk to each other. And we also need to look deep inside ourselves and see, how am I making this decision? Am I looking at this as a Christian or as a Republican or as a Democrat? How am I looking at this, and how is my decision affecting the life of another person? In how they live, how they die. We really need to look deep within ourselves. But I don't think we are. We're reacting more, and we're not listening.
Sister, you're a woman of action, not just words. What advice do you have for people in terms of how to act and how to make a difference?
We need to educate ourselves. And I think what, Brian said is so important, that in our parishes, to educate the faithful. For many people, the only contact they have with the church is on Sunday, and really to use that homily to, call people to the common good and to call people to the critical issues of our day. Then to participate at your state level. We've passed very very good common sense gun legislation in Washington state. As you would expect, some of the measures like limiting the capacity of the magazines is being challenged. There's a lawsuit, but to really work in your state, because I try to have hope for the Congress, but some days it's kind of hard to do that. But I think that, if we can get a critical mass in our states and educate the people, we could impact the Congress. And also, we can do that by voting. Also, people, I'd like to say, if you are an investor, if you have retirement funds, et cetera, talk to your managers. What are you invested in? Because I presume you aren't invested in firearm manufacturers. We weren't either until we wanted to do this work. But what about the banks? Are you invested in banks and their financing, the gun manufacturers? MasterCard and Visa, their platforms are being used to buy ghost guns online. And, more and more people are hearing about ghost guns. Educate yourself on what that's about. And on June 21st, we have a shareholder resolution on MasterCard's proxy asking them to do a report on the risks to their business of letting their platform be used. So, we really need to educate ourselves, and there's lots of good places to do it these days.
We're almost out of time, but I feel like I have to get one more question in. This is someone says, I'm a lifelong Catholic from Charleston. And as you recall, Charleston was another example of a white man came in to murder Black people. And why don't we understand the connections between race and violence? He makes reference to some of the other things we're going to do, a Eucharistic revival. What can we do together to address the white supremacy, the racism that was at the heart of Buffalo and El Paso, as Rena mentioned? And what can we do to deal with the complacency that allows these policies to begin with? Let me turn to Father Brian, and then I'll give the Archbishop the last word.
I think we have to be forthright and talk about the fear that motivates or keeps the majority of good, decent white Catholics silent on these issues. I believe that most white Catholics know that racism is a serious issue. I think many know that racism is wrong. I think also, though, that many are afraid to say anything, to speak up, because they don't want to upset members of their family or their friends. And I think that we need to really infuse, we just celebrated the Feast of Pentecost. We need an infusion of courage among the majority of good, decent white Catholics to speak up and to challenge the everyday ways in which they see racism at work. I've told my students that they're going to see more naked racism than I will, because when I'm in the room, everyone knows how to behave. But when white people speak up and say and do very racist things and other white people let them get away with it, that creates the atmosphere in which these things can nurture. I can't believe that 18-year-old in Buffalo or the 18-year-old in Charleston, that no one around them knew that this was happening. And so we need to pray for the gift of courage so that the ordinary white person speaks up and translates their conviction that racism is wrong into action. Because I'm going to be very optimistic here. St. Thomas says that courage is the virtue that translates moral conviction into moral action. So we need to pray for the Spirit's gift of courage.
It's wonderful to have Thomas Aquinas quoted in one of our dialogues that elevates everything. Archbishop, I want to turn to you for a final word. But before I do, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for showing us what a field hospital looks like. You have made us proud to be a part of this family of faith, even in terrible times. So we're very grateful. Please communicate to your people, to Sacred Heart Parish, that people all across the country and all across the world want to stand with them in their loss. But how in El Paso and Buffalo and other places do we see other human beings as less than us?
Yes, I think what Father Brian said is there is fear, and we have a system or systems who are failing, and that they are obsolete. They are not anymore what we need as a society. And these systems have been trying to impose themselves in such a way that fear in the communities. I had been in confirmations at the same time of these weeks after the shooting in Uvalde, and even before with the other shootings. And the young people are afraid. Children, they don't know what to do. Sister Mary put it right there. Has to do with life, health, I mean, that town, Uvalde, now it's not going to be a ghost town. It will be a pathetic town. People are like so afraid of what will be next, not only about shootings, but about their lives. So children and youth are the future, and they don't make comments anymore. Everything is okay. Has been systems who have put people in depression. And then we want them to be alive and to be people. I remember that movie that came many years ago, that people are people, and we see it in the picture today, working in from different angles, that people, the respect of people is not there. And so we need to bring it up, and we have to denunciate and to be prophetic and to know, there is not much to lose. We have been losing lives and children and young people and adults and elderly in hospitals, in schools, in churches. I mean, what else we want to lose? Or what other studies we need to do of dead bodies? They're not enough. And people discussing about the Second Amendment, like we needed to review the Second Amendment. I mean, it's very sad. And here we have people who are experts in social environments, teachers in hospital ministry, Sister Judy, who has been leader. You have been in the conference yourself, John, and why we get paralyzed in the USCCB. Why? Our system, even in the USCCB, is not working. Because we are not able to express ourselves and to be what we are called to be as followers of Jesus Christ and missionaries.
You know what? That's exactly where we ought to end. Your passion, your urgency, your faith, your hope, your anger is where we ought to leave this. I want to thank my colleagues, Kim Daniels and Anna Misla, who made this possible. I want to remind you that this has been recorded and you can share it with others. I think people would gain a lot from watching this discussion. After the Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision, we're going to do a dialogue on what the consistent ethic requires in the aftermath of that decision. And check our website for when that is and how we're going to put it together. The one thing I would end with, and I echo what Father Brian said, Catholic social teaching puts things together that our politics tears apart. Human life and dignity, rights and responsibilities, solidarity and subsidiarity. So much of the debate takes one of those and pits it against the other. And in fact, our faith pulls them together. And as the Archbishop and Sister Mary and Rena and Judy and Brian have said, in the end, this is about human beings made in the image and likeness of God. So as we think about what we've been through, let us resolve that we're not just going to think, we're going to act, we're going to make our voices heard. We have had a pastor, a healthcare leader, a theologian, an advocate, and a journalist. And they have helped us see what we have been through together through the eyes of faith. And they have offered ways to help heal our broken hearts in our broken nation. And for that, we thank them and we thank you for joining us.